you talked about creating chaos, it sounded like that it was like word of mouth is, I think, what you all say in English, that it just people were just spreading the word that this is happening, and you got more and more people excited about what is going on. And I remember we had a podcast episode with Jim Hall. His story of creating FreeDOS was also very similar. Like, he came up with the idea and how people got excited, individuals got excited about the project, and it just became very, very popular. And I wonder that, as you were saying and talking about people working on these open source projects as a hobby, and then more and more companies and corporations were coming into the ecosystem, like, did you feel that difference when you created Rocky Linux, like any of the corporate drive, or the ecosystem being more filled with companies? And I think these days we're using the word or term corporate open source. Like, did the environment feel different, and was creating the project any different because of that?
Yes. Oh, that is a great question. Uh, Very much so. The the reason why Rocky Linux came to exist is very similar to the reason why CentOS came to exist, which is a company switched the licensing or availability of a particular project that a lot of people were using. And in doing that affects a lot of people. And one of the values of open source is stability, right? So you have this ultimate stability because of the source code availability. But if the maintainers of that code decide to pivot themselves and go into a different direction, it ends up where there is disruption. So one of the things that happened was, again, CentOS then ceased to exist, and Rocky Linux came in to fill that void. And one of the things, that occurred immediately was a lot of individuals stood up and said, we want to be part of it. And, from my first blog comment that I wanted to go create this, we hit about over 10,000 people in a month and a half of people who joined and wanted to be part of this. And as great and cool as that sounds, let me describe how much of a challenge that it is to try to properly manage and direct and align 10,000 people who all want to help. And they're doing it through a communication mechanism that doesn't persist messages over 10,000. So if you've got 10,000 users, each person sending one message, you literally lose the next message. So we saw that. And in Slack, every day I would wake up and I would look at the messages, and I would have a stream of direct messages for as long as you want to scroll. And by the time I got about halfway done, they all said, sorry, you have to go buy a professional account of Slack to read this message. To which point I would respond, sorry, I can't see your message. Please feel free to retype it. And it would happen again. So it was clear that Slack was not the right solution for what it is we were using this for. And I did reach out to Slack, and even at an incredible discount, and they were trying to be very supportive. It just was not tenable in terms of how much it costs to have a 10,000 person Slack instance. Very, very expensive. So it was not tenable. So we ended up moving over to Mattermost. But the creation of Rocky Linux started off with individuals, to get back to the question, started off with individuals. But the individuals were responding because almost exclusively each one of them were affected at their day job. So these were people that were both hobbyists as well as professional IT administrators. And they're like, there's a massive pain point for me. There's now job security at risk, among other things. We need CentOS to come back. And so as a result, we had a ton of people, but those individuals are being represented by companies, mostly, not all of them, but mostly. And the one thing that we heard that was loud and clear from both the people that were coming in as well as companies that offered to sponsor and help with this, AWS and Google and Azure and VMware and Naver Cloud, just to give a few name drops, were extremely supportive of what it is we were doing. And the one thing that everybody kept saying universally was, please don't put this in a company. And to be clear, I was initially thinking of putting this in my company. I'm a founder CEO of a small, startup. Then it was a small startup. And so I'm like, well, we're perfectly situated to actually do this. And I can easily direct research capital and funding to solve this problem. But the one thing we heard was, please don't put this in a company. Now, this is the commercial open source model that you mentioned. And the commercial open source model I think it's great, but it also has some limitations depending on what the goal is of that open source project. If the goal of that open source project is wide, diverse collection of contributors, the core open source model or commercial open source model actually stunts growth there, because you now have one company that controls, owns, and could potentially hold that project hostage. And so it stunts that growth. So we decided to do something different. So again, being the CEO of CIQ gave me a little bit of leeway here, but I did have to get this, of course, approved by my board and investors. But I basically said, I want CIQ to support this, to be a primary sponsor of this, a founding sponsor of this, but we don't want to own it. We don't want to try to control it. We don't want to ever be able to hold it hostage. We want this to be truly in the community. And I got agreement with my board. I have a wonderful team of investors and stakeholders in CIQ, and so everybody saw this and everybody agreed. And so we then became a founding sponsor of the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation, which now hosts Rocky Linux. And it gives us the ability to now contribute, to take part in the development, and for other companies to contribute and take part in the development without CIQ or any other company holding it hostage. So it's separate but yet supported by these commercial companies. So this is the big difference. Now, a long-winded way of kind of going back to the initial question, this is what is different. Back in the early Chaos days and even CentOS days, it was almost exclusively just individuals and hobbyists. Now what we're seeing is, now that this is mainstream, there's still a lot of individuals and hobbyists now that are taking part and being part of this. But now we're also supported by a tremendous number of wonderful organizations and sponsors. And it led me to something that I repeated a number of times when I used to give talks on this, which is, how do you guarantee the stability of an open source project? And the answer is, well, it's very valuable to have one or a few individuals that are absolutely dedicated to this, right? We used to call it the bus factor, but I like to call it now the lottery factor, right? If any of those people win the lottery and retire and go to move to a paradise island with no internet connection, although maybe that's not paradise then, but we'll move, and they're not contributing to open source anymore or doing anything else, like that's not stable. That's not truly stable. But what about if one company controls it? Well, it brings a different level of stability, but again, not necessarily stable. What truly brings stability is having multiple companies, multiple individuals, and a group of different organizations and people that are all working together for a common goal. And it's even best when they're competitors. When you have competitors all working on the same thing, you end up with levels of stability that you don't get otherwise, because no single vendor will allow another vendor to do something bad to the project.